Day 7991. I sat in the stark, white, synthetic sunlight at a cheap plastic table, finishing the single bottle of water we each received in our daily rations. Most were finished with their rations by noon, but lately, I'd been trying to make things last. The rations weren't getting any smaller, but every day I was less and less satiated by them, as though half the food I ate was vanishing on the way down. As I got up to throw the bottle away, I couldn't help but overhear a poorly hushed conversation. "Have you been near any of the vents?" A sigh. "Again with the ghost stories? Come on, Abe. What's gotten into you? All you're doing is scaring people. They should be scared. They're there. They're really there. Every time I lie down to sleep, I can hear them through the vent next to my head, screeching and howling. They're distant. I haven't seen them, but they're there. They must be hiding out in the ventilation system so they can... Abe, please keep your voice down. No, listen to me. They sound human, all right, but they're not. They're not human. They're doing it to taunt us, to get inside your head. Abe. And I think they're breathing something, too. They're poisoning the air so that we get hungrier faster. People are gonna lose their minds and eat each other unless... Abe! Can't you see? It's not Abraham. Shut the fuck up, all right? You're not helping anyone." I heard a brief noise, like a single stifled sob. "I'm sorry. They're torturing me. You don't understand. Their voices, the sounds they make. They haven't let me sleep in days." "How many days, Abe?" "I don't remember. 2 or 3 so far." "Well, there you go. Get some sleep then, and quit it with the stories before somebody actually listens to you." The conversation seemed to end there, so I discreetly left the eating area in the hopes nobody would see I'd been in earshot. I was scolding myself internally for eavesdropping like that, but what's done is done. It'd been more than a week since we were first called to the panic room. Not even the soldiers had left it. Everyone who lived in the mountain now lived in this room, crowded and feverish. The synthetic sky above us was set to a blank white tone with subtle halogen tinting in the mornings and afternoons, darkening and brightening as day and night come, but never changing color or simulating clouds like the ones upstairs had. Using tall steel racks with opaque rubber curtains hanging from them, the massive room was divided up into sections. It looked like a slaughterhouse. Most were bedding areas, but there were also some eating areas, groups of portable toilets and showers, a clinic, a barracks, and long paths between all the different compartments like the streets of a cold, shitty rubber town. The acropolis of this colorless rubber and steel village was the latticed fence platform at the head of it all, where the council seemed to be stuck in an endless purgatory of papers and comlinks and digital databases, hunting desperately for something to tell them what they were supposed to do. Beside the platform, there was an indent in the wall with a blast door leading to the Panic's room's annex. a skyless, claustrophobic corridor of bare concrete. Some had chosen to sleep on its hard floors to escape the crowded atrium, taking their bedding with them. Some of the soldiers had displayed annoyance at that, and once in a while somebody would trip over them, but nobody had the strength to argue anymore. Most of the rooms in the annex were for maintenance or storage as far as I could tell, except for an unused kitchen and a freezer full of rations. Lastly, at the end of the corridor, past some broom closets and maintenance hatches, were the entrances to the locker rooms. Nobody used them as far as I could tell. The portable toilets and showers in the panic room's atrium were much more convenient, albeit hardly as dignified. As the synthetic sky grew darker, I made my way back to my assigned sleeping bag ghetto, situated right next to the panic room's towering blast door. The hanging strips of frigid rubber curtain that made up the entrance caressed my face and shoulders, welcoming me into the tight sleeping area. The inside had a sterile stench, that potent smell of medicine and latex, with the dusting of sterilizer powder. "What's up, Morgan?" one of my many roommates greeted. She was the only medical personnel who slept in this block, so she rarely left unless called on. I decided not to pretend in the hopes she'd just assume I hadn't heard and try talking to somebody else. The sickness I felt had only worsened for the past couple of weeks, but I still hadn't told anyone or asked for help. I'd hidden it fairly well, even when I was certain I'd explode if people kept trying to talk to me, but the pain was starting to escape with my words. There were enough stressed and anxious people in here as it was, all doing nothing but being stressed and anxious, making those around them stressed and anxious, spreading it like a pestilence of the mind. I preferred shutting up over being another patient zero. "Hey, you all right?" she persisted. She was looking at me with a doctor's eyes. She knew something was wrong. "Yeah," I lied, almost wincing. "Yeah, I'm fine." It was obvious I hadn't made a very convincing response. "Just please don't talk to me," I added. One of her fellow medics stuck his head through the rubber entrance. "We need a hand at Section 7 again," he said. I felt her glance back at me before getting up to go, but I wasn't looking to see her expression. Too feverish, too cozy up inside it. I laid my back down on top of my sleeping bag. Then, just as I started to drift off, my dark eyelids got unexpectedly darker. The faint glow of synthetic sunlight stopped bleeding through them. I opened my eyes. The whole room was pitch black. At first, the dull evening chatter dropped entirely, removing all stimuli from the lightless room for just a moment. It was like floating in a frigid sensory deprivation tank. The chatter started to pick up again, now in the form of panicked murmurs. They evolved from there. The collective tension could be felt in the air, as though the color of the darkness itself had turned a cold blood red. Something large could be heard moving, something metal. It reverberated throughout the room. "It's an electromagnetic lock," I remembered. without power, the magnets would deactivate. With a sound like rolling tank threads, the flaccid motors and unresisting cogs began to move, releasing muffled grinding and rattling from inside the door and the walls around it, accompanied by a chord progression of the heavy steel door running along its many rails. Something was pulling it open. I remember sitting straight up in my sleeping bag, frozen solid, wanting so badly to move, but completely unable to. The sound of the blast door opening was holding me back by the ears, freezing every joint in my body with its resonating metallic groan. Then, it stopped. I could see the green discs of the soldiers' night vision goggles and the laser pointers from their guns through the layers of curtain. They were on their way, locked, loaded, and pathetically unprepared. Inhuman footsteps, cold clicks like a massive bird's talons, uneasily caressed the floor, each tread like a blade gently pressed against skin. It was close, somewhere just outside the rubber curtain wall. Some of the soldiers' heavy footsteps stopped nearby. "This isn't safe," I heard one whisper. "There's no cover. Somebody's going to get shot. Quiet." Another one snapped under his breath. "Switch to burst fire." The soldier raised his voice and announced an order to the room. "Everyone get on the ground, cover your necks, and whatever happens, remain The soldier fell to the ground. Something was on top of him, screaming vicious screams. Their screams. Those are what I remember most vividly. They were human, the way a mannequin is almost perfect, but unconvincing. It was too primal to be human, but too maddeningly enraged to be an animal. No, not enraged. This was hate. So much hate. The soldier cried out in agony as the rest of the room ignited with a fearful cacophony. There were some sounds I could still hear over the cries. Sounds of rabbits snarling, bones snapping, clothing and flesh tearing in unison. "Get it off me! Get it off! Get it off, please!" I heard amidst the wailing crowd. The area flickered between blinding brightness and blinding darkness as the soldiers' muzzle flashes lit up the room in brief bursts, reverberating loudly through the panic room. I caught a glimpse of some shape clawing at the soldier on the ground. When his cries ceased, so did the gunfire. The lasers whipped around the room in desperate search of their missing target. The sky reactivated in backup power mode, bathing the room in a dim red. The door was closed now. Power returned to its magnetic lack, and that thing, whatever it was, had vanished into the chaos. Meanwhile, the howling, poorly lit room remained flooded with the agonized roar of a panicking crowd, punctuated every so often by another almost human cry. There must have been more than one of those things. Blurry shadow puppets, silhouettes from outside the sleeping area cast by the sparse red backup lighting, showed me what was going on. The unlucky soldier was motionless on the floor. The bullets fired by his comrades must have gone through whatever was attacking him and killed him. Suddenly, before I could register any more of what was happening, I was on my back, with something heavy straddling me, screaming that same horrible scream right in front of my face. Its hateful eyes were just like its screech, an unconvincing facade of a human's, filled with only burning hatred. They were surrounded by a dark, colorless hide that hugged its skeletal body like a mummy. It held my head against the floor with one of its clawed hands, then dislocated its jaw until it made contact with the base of its neck, gagging out a foaming assortment of mandibles and tongues and feelers from the back of its gullet. Just as the mandibles neared my throat, something in my gut churned painfully. It felt like a deep knife twisting in my abdomen. As if in response, the monster hesitated. It narrowed its eyes and froze like it was listening to something. Something right there in that room with us, but I couldn't hear. I was deafened by a nearby chorus of gunfire. Hollow point rounds erupted through the rubber curtain and peppered the creature's side with wounds, ejecting plumes of mist out the other side. Yelping and wailing in that almost human voice, it rolled off of me and scampered away on its hands and feet. By the time the soldiers had come in, it was nowhere to be found. "Emergency evacuation! Get everyone to the annex!" one of them ordered over the deafening crowd. I got up and burst through the hanging rubber ribbons. At the opposite end of the room, right at the door to the annex, somebody was holding a blinding white star above their head, a signal flare. I stuck close to the disoriented soldiers as they navigated through the tramp in the dim blood red lit, scattering and separating and regrouping over and over in confusion, but ultimately hurting those who followed them in the direction of the flare. "Kill on sight!" I heard one of them order along the way. "Just open fire on any you see!" "It's too crowded in here, we'll hit somebody!" "Fucking open fire!" By the time we got to the door, guns were popping and crackling throughout the chamber. I slipped into the annex behind some soldiers at the last minute. The heavy blast doors were already closing in. Those who'd been behind me clamored for the entrance. All but one made it inside. He was too late. His foot crossed the threshold, but the space between the doors was already too narrow for him to fit through in time. Some of the foremost people inside, soldiers and civilians alike, rushed to push him back. They were afraid he'd get crushed between the doors and prevent them from closing all the way. "What are you doing? Let me in!" he begged, fighting against the crowd. "I'm sorry, it's too late," one of them said. No, just let me in, please." "Move, you idiot," came another voice. "You're blocking the doors. You're going to get us all killed." "Stop, please, stop. You can't do this. Just let me in." The cold black of a soldier's stock made contact with his nose, sending him stumbling back into the red-skilled hell. Through the slowly narrowing space between the blast doors, I caught one last glimpse of him. His bloody hands were cupping his nose and mouth, but his eyes were still visible. I watched as they transitioned from shock to fear. And then, before it all closed all the way, to that exact same glare of maddening, inhuman hatred. When the doors closed, the annex blinding lights came on. There was chaos in here too. Some were beating on the soldier who kicked them out. Some were beating on those people. Some were trying to break it up, but I just wanted to get out of the crossfire. When I emerged from the fray, I collapsed against the rough wall amidst a handful of other civilians and soldiers. The person next to me was bleeding from horrific slashes in his stomach. Another person seemed to have a bullet wound, with the medic next to him putting pressure on the hole with blood-soaked latex gloves. Some others were lined up near the wall, all lying motionless with their faces down. I felt like I didn't know any of these people anymore. Our relationships had all been made of cheap plastic, and every single one broke under the pressure. Just as the chaos at the door was reaching its peak, a sharp gunshot reverberated throughout the hallway, followed by the unmistakable zips of a bullet ricocheting through the narrow space. Every remaining heartbeat in the room paused, waiting desperately for it to end. When it finally did, the room was silent. There was a head count that night. 91 of us remained. Hello, listeners. Thanks for listening to tonight's Creepypasta, Synthetic Skies, Part 3. I would like to thank the author, Pyrous, for allowing me to narrate the story. Stay tuned for Part 4. If you would like to send me a story to be featured in a future episode, please send it over to my email. Do not forget to subscribe and click the notification bell to keep up with future content. Thanks again for listening. And as always, I am your host, Marie Lives the Horror.